The morning sun cast long shadows across the research station on Kepler 442b as Dr. Sarah Chen made her usual rounds through the xenobiology lab. The distant twin stars painted everything in hues of amber and gold, but Sarah's attention was focused entirely on the empty containment unit in the corner of the lab. For 3 weeks now, Subject 17 had been missing. The small dragon-like creature, no bigger than a house cat, had somehow vanished from what was supposed to be an escape-proof habitat. Her colleagues had written it off as another failed specimen, probably dead somewhere in the station's ventilation system. But Sarah couldn't let go. She had been the one to find the creature during their last expedition to the crystalline caves of the planet's northern continent. While her team collected mineral samples, Sarah had heard something that shouldn't exist on this supposedly lifeless world, a soft, melodic humming that seemed to resonate with the very crystals around them. Following the sound deeper into the cave system, she had discovered the small creature trapped beneath a collapsed crystal formation. Its scales shimmered with an iridescent blue-green that seemed to shift and change based on its mood, and its eyes held an intelligence that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The creature had been injured, its left wing bent at an awkward angle and several scales cracked and bleeding a luminescent silver fluid. Without thinking, Sarah had carefully freed it from the debris, speaking in soft, soothing tones as she worked. The creature had watched her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, never once trying to bite or scratch, as if it understood she was trying to help. Back at the station, Sarah had spent countless hours nursing the creature back to health. She named it Echo because of the way it would mimic sounds from around the lab, the hum of machinery, the beep of computers, even fragments of human speech. But Echo was far more than just a clever mimic. The creature seemed to understand complex concepts, responding to questions with elaborate gestures and even attempting to communicate through a series of chirps and clicks that followed distinct patterns. Sarah had documented everything meticulously, building a case that Echo represented the first confirmed sentient lifeform discovered on Kepler 442b. Her reports had been met with skepticism from the Colonial Science Council. Dragons, even small ones, belonged in fairy tales, not serious scientific journals. The fact that the planet had shown no signs of advanced life in previous surveys only made her claims seem more outlandish. But Sarah knew what she had observed. Echo wasn't just intelligent, the creature was trying to tell her something important. In the weeks before its disappearance, Echo had become increasingly agitated, repeatedly flying to the lab's main window and gesturing toward the mountain range that dominated the northern horizon. The creature would make urgent clicking sounds and perform an elaborate series of movements that Sarah had begun to suspect was some form of language. Now, as she stared at the empty habitat, Sarah felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. The other researchers thought she had formed an unhealthy attachment to a simple animal. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief xenobiologist, had even suggested she take a leave of absence to gain some perspective on the situation. The soft hiss of the lab door opening interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to see Yuki Tanaka, the station's communications specialist, entering with a concerned expression on her face. "Sarah, you need to see this," Yuki said, holding up a tablet displaying a series of complex waveforms. "We've been picking up some strange transmissions from the northern mountains. They started about 3 weeks ago, right around the time your specimen went missing." Sarah's heart began to race. "What kind of transmissions?" "That's just it, we can't identify the source or decode the content. The signals are incredibly complex, almost like they're layered with multiple meanings. But here's the weird part." Yuki swiped to another screen showing a spectrographic analysis. "The base frequency patterns match some of the recordings you made of your creature's vocalizations." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Echo sounds matched these transmissions, it could mean the creature hadn't died or escaped randomly. It might have been responding to some kind of call. "I need to go to the mountains," Sarah said immediately. Yuki shook her head. "The northern range is off limits. You know the Council's restrictions, too dangerous for research teams after what happened to the Peterson expedition." Sarah remembered the Peterson incident well. 6 months ago, a geological survey team had disappeared in the northern mountains for 2 days before being found, completely unharmed but with no memory of where they had been. The Council had declared the area a hazard zone, effectively ending all research activities in that region. Besides, Yuki continued, even if you could get authorization, the weather systems up there are unpredictable. The crystal formations create electromagnetic interference that makes navigation nearly impossible. But Sarah was already forming a plan. That evening, after the day shift had ended and most of the station's crew had retired to their quarters, she made her way to the equipment storage bay. The station maintained several all-terrain vehicles for emergency evacuations, and Sarah knew that the bio-research team's ATV was equipped with the environmental gear she would need for a mountain expedition. As she gathered supplies, portable shelter, emergency rations, atmospheric monitoring equipment, Sarah tried not to think about the consequences of what she was planning. Unauthorized expeditions beyond the station's safe zone were grounds for immediate termination and deportation back to Earth. But something deep in her gut told her that Echo was alive and needed her help. The creature had trusted her once before, when it was trapped and injured. Now it was her turn to take a leap of faith. Sarah loaded the last of her equipment into the ATV and checked the vehicle's navigation system. The transmissions Yuki had detected were originating from a region about 60 kilometers northwest of the station, deep in the heart of the mountain range where the crystal formations were most dense. As she started the engine and guided the vehicle out of the bay, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the side mirror. Her usually neat brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held a determination that surprised even her. Dr. Sarah Chan, the careful scientist who had built her career on methodical research and peer-reviewed papers, was about to venture into forbidden territory based on nothing more than intuition and the bond she had formed with a creature that might not even be alive. The ATV's headlights cut through the darkness as Sarah navigated the rough terrain leading toward the mountains. The twin stars had set hours ago, leaving only the faint glow of the planet's 3 moons to illuminate the landscape. In the distance, she could see the jagged silhouettes of the peaks rising against the star-filled sky. About an hour into the journey, Sarah began to notice something strange. The electromagnetic readings on her instruments were fluctuating in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic. She pulled over and stepped out of the vehicle to get a better look at her surroundings. The crystalline formations that dotted the landscape were glowing with a soft, pulsing light that she had never observed before. As she watched, the glow seemed to move through the crystals in waves, traveling from formation to formation like some kind of vast, geological nervous system. Sarah quickly set up her recording equipment and began documenting the phenomenon. The light pulses were definitely following a pattern, and, as she listened to the audio recordings through her headphones, she could hear faint harmonic vibrations that were remarkably similar to Echo's vocalizations. Her tablet chimed with an incoming signal analysis. The electromagnetic patterns she was recording matched perfectly with the transmissions Yuki had detected. Whatever was happening in the mountains was connected to the entire crystal network that covered this region of the planet. As Sarah packed up her equipment and prepared to continue her journey, she felt a growing sense of excitement mixed with apprehension. She was beginning to suspect that Echo's disappearance was connected to something much larger than a simple escape from the lab. The creature might have been responding to a call from its own kind, a species that had somehow remained hidden from human detection until now. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. First contact protocols existed for situations like this, but they involved careful preparation, diplomatic teams, and approval from the highest levels of human government. Sarah was a xenobiologist armed with nothing but camping gear and a determination to find her missing friend. But, as the ATV climbed higher into the mountains and the crystal formations grew larger and more complex around her, Sarah knew there was no turning back. Whatever she found in those peaks would change everything for her, for humanity's understanding of this world, and, quite possibly, for the future of human-alien relations. The road ahead disappeared into the shadows between towering crystal spires that rose like ancient monuments against the alien sky. Somewhere in that maze of stone and light, Echo was waiting. Sarah pressed her foot to the accelerator and drove deeper into the unknown, guided by nothing more than faith and the growing certainty that some bonds transcend the boundaries between species. Behind her, the research station's lights grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, leaving Sarah alone with the pulsing glow of the crystals and the mysterious signals that called to her from the heart of the mountains. The real journey was just beginning. Sarah's journey through the crystalline mountain range had taken most of the night. As dawn approached, painting the alien peaks in shades of violet and gold, she found herself at the entrance to a massive cave system that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The electromagnetic readings on her instruments had been growing stronger for the past hour, and now they were off the charts. she parked the ATV at the cave mouth and stepped outside, immediately struck by the complete silence that surrounded her. No wind, no distant sounds of the planet's sparse wildlife, just an expectant hush that seemed to press against her eardrums. The cave entrance was easily large enough to drive the vehicle through, but something told Sarah that the next part of her journey needed to be made on foot. Gathering her essential equipment, recording devices, portable lights, emergency beacon, Sarah stepped into the cave. The walls were lined with the same crystalline formation she had observed throughout the mountains, but here they were massive, some reaching 20 meters in height. More importantly, they were all glowing with that rhythmic pulse she had been following. As she moved deeper into the cave system, Sarah began to notice that the crystal formations weren't random. They were arranged in deliberate patterns, creating chambers and corridors that seemed designed for movement. The thought sent a chill down her spine. If these formations were artificial, then the intelligence behind their creation was operating on a scale far beyond anything humans had imagined. The cave system branched in multiple directions, but Sarah found herself drawn to the path where the electromagnetic signals were strongest. Her instruments were barely functioning now, overwhelmed by whatever energy source lay ahead. She was navigating purely by instinct and the hope that she was moving toward Echo. After what felt like hours of walking through increasingly elaborate crystal corridors, Sarah emerged into a vast underground chamber that took her breath away. The space was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral, with crystalline formations reaching up into darkness far above her head. But it wasn't the size of the chamber that made Sarah gasp, it was its inhabitants. Dozens of creatures like Echo moved through the space, their iridescent scales catching and reflecting the crystal light in dazzling displays of color. But these weren't the small, cat-sized beings Sarah had expected. These creatures ranged in size from Echo's diminutive form to massive beings the size of small aircraft, their wings spanning incredible distances as they glided effortlessly through the chamber. And there, perched on a crystal formation near the center of the space, was Echo. The small creature spotted Sarah immediately and let out a series of excited chirps and clicks. But instead of flying to her as Sarah expected, Echo remained where it was, gesturing urgently toward the far end of the chamber. Following the creature's gaze, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden behind the largest crystal formation, was the wreckage of a spacecraft. But this wasn't human technology. The sleek, organic curves of the vessel's hull suggested a design philosophy completely different from anything in Earth's fleet. More disturbing still, Sarah could see evidence of recent damage, scorched metal and crystalline growths that appeared to be consuming the ship's structure. As Sarah moved closer, trying to process what she was seeing, a new sound filled the chamber. It was a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the crystals themselves, but underneath it, Sarah could hear something else, voices. Alien voices, speaking in a language of clicks, harmonics, and melodic phrases that reminded her of Echo's vocalizations. The largest of the dragon-like creatures, a magnificent being with scales that shifted through every color of the spectrum, glided down from the chamber's heights and landed gracefully near Sarah. Up close, the creature was even more impressive, standing nearly 3 meters tall with eyes that held an ancient intelligence. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized she was witnessing first contact with an alien species. Everything about this moment would be scrutinized by historians and xenobiologists for generations to come. But before she could formulate any kind of proper greeting protocol, Echo solved the problem for her. The small creature flew from its perch and landed on Sarah's shoulder, nuzzling against her neck in the same affectionate gesture it had shown back at the lab. The larger creature's eyes widened, and it began speaking in rapid, musical tones to the other beings in the chamber. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she could read the emotional content clearly enough. Surprise, confusion, and what sounded very much like concern filled the alien voices. Echo responded with its own series of vocalizations, and, gradually, Sarah began to realize that she was the subject of a very intense discussion. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Echo apparently serving as some kind of translator or advocate. Finally, the large creature approached Sarah directly and did something completely unexpected. It bowed its magnificent head in what was unmistakably a gesture of respect. When it spoke, its voice was like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze, but underneath the alien tones, Sarah heard something impossible. Words. English words, heavily accented and strangely inflected, but undeniably human language. You are the one who healed the small speaker, the creature said slowly, as if testing each syllable. Echo has told us of your kindness. Sarah's mind reeled. Not only were these beings intelligent, they had learned human language from Echo's observations back at the research station. The implications were staggering. Yes, I helped Echo when it was injured, Sarah managed to say. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a xenobiologist from the Human Research Station. The large creature's expression, Sarah was surprised to realize she could read its facial expressions, grew troubled. We know of your station. We know of your people's ships that come to our world. Your world? Sarah asked, confused. But our surveys showed this planet was uninhabited. We've been here for 2 years and never detected any signs of intelligent life. A series of harmonious sounds filled the chamber as the other creatures began what Sarah could only describe as laughter. But there was no humor in the sound, only bitter irony. You see only what your machines can measure, the large creature replied. We have watched you. Studied you. Your kind looks for life that is like yourselves. You do not recognize intelligence that exists in harmony with stone and crystal. Sarah felt a growing sense of horror as the creature's words sank in. You've been here all along. We've been studying your planet, mining your crystals, building on your territory, and we never knew. Echo was sent to observe, the creature continued. To learn if your kind could be trusted. It was captured during this mission. We had given it up for lost until the small speaker began transmitting tales of a human who showed compassion. The full scope of the situation was beginning to dawn on Sarah. Echo hadn't escaped from the lab, it had finally found a way to return home and report on what it had learned about humanity. And, based on Sarah's treatment of the injured creature, the dragons had decided humans might be worth communicating with. The crashed ship, Sarah said, gesturing toward the wreckage. What happened? The large creature's scales darkened to deep purples and blues, a color Sarah was beginning to associate with sadness or distress. Your people's military vessels patrol the outer system. One of our exploration ships was detected. They fired upon it before any communication could be established. Sarah's heart sank. The implications were devastating. Humanity's first contact with an alien civilization had been an act of aggression. The dragons had every right to consider humans a threat. The survivors made it to the surface, the creature continued. But they were badly injured. We have been caring for them here while deciding how to respond. How many survived? Sarah asked quietly. 3. They are recovering, but the trauma runs deep. Your weapons caused damage we have never seen before. Echo chirped softly from Sarah's shoulder and gestured toward a side passage. The large creature nodded and began moving in that direction, clearly expecting Sarah to follow. As they walked through more crystal corridors, Sarah tried to process everything she had learned. The dragons were clearly an advanced civilization, one that had developed along completely different lines from humanity. They appeared to live in harmony with the crystalline formations that covered their world, possibly even using them as a form of technology. Their society seemed peaceful, focused on exploration and understanding rather than conquest. And humanity's response to first contact had been to shoot first and ask questions later. The side passage opened into a smaller chamber where 3 more dragon-like beings rested on beds of soft, glowing crystals. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the terrible injuries they had sustained. Energy burns covered their scales, and one of them was missing part of its wing. They fear your kind, the large creature explained quietly. They believe humans will bring more ships. More weapons. Sarah approached the injured being slowly, her medical training taking over. She had treated Echo's injuries with basic first aid, but these wounds were far more severe. Still, some things were universal: pain, fear, the need for gentle care. As she knelt beside the most severely injured dragon, Sarah began to hum softly, the same melody she had used to calm Echo during those first difficult days in the lab. The effect was immediate. The creature's breathing became less labored, and its scales shifted from the dark colors of pain to lighter, more peaceful hues. "You have the healing touch," the large creature observed with surprise. "This is not common among your kind." "It's not magic," Sarah said as she carefully examined the creature's wounds. "Just practice and compassion. I've spent my whole career studying and caring for different forms of life." She looked up at the large creature, seeing past its alien appearance to the intelligence and concern in its eyes. "What's your name? I can't keep thinking of you as the large creature." "I am called." "Resonance of Deepstone," came the reply. "In your language, perhaps." "Stone." "Stone," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "I'm honored to meet you. And I want you to know that not all humans are like the ones who attacked your ship. Many of us dream of meeting other intelligent species peacefully." Stone's scales shifted to warmer colors, golds and soft greens that Sarah was learning to associate with hope. Echo spoke of this. It said you asked many questions. Wanted to understand. Never tried to harm or control. "That's what science should be," Sarah said firmly. "Understanding, not exploitation." As she continued examining the injured dragons, Sarah's mind was racing through possibilities. The medical equipment back at the research station could help treat these injuries. More importantly, if she could establish formal communication between the two species, maybe this disaster could be turned into an opportunity for real dialogue. But first, she needed to get back to the station and convince her colleagues that humanity's future might depend on proving that they were worthy of the dragon's trust. The question was whether she could do it before the military decided to take more aggressive action against what they perceived as an alien threat. Echo chirped softly from its perch nearby, and Sarah realized that the small creature understood exactly what she was thinking. Their bond had brought her to this moment, and now it was up to her to bridge the gap between two civilizations before fear and misunderstanding destroyed any chance for peace. The fate of both species might well rest in the hands of one human scientist and her peculiar dragon friend. Sarah spent the next 6 hours in the crystal chamber, working alongside Stone and the other dragons to treat the injured survivors. Using a combination of human medical knowledge and the dragons' understanding of their own physiology, they managed to stabilize the worst of the wounds and ease the survivors' pain. But, as she worked, Sarah became aware of a growing tension in the chamber. The dragons were communicating in rapid bursts of their musical language, and their scales were shifting to darker, more agitated colors. Something was happening. "Stone," Sarah said during a brief break, "what's wrong?" The others seemed worried. The large dragon's expression grew grave. "The Deep Council has been summoned. Word of the attack has reached the Emperor of all crystals. He comes to decide our response." "Emperor?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "How big is your civilization?" "We are many," Stone replied simply. "Millions of nests across thousands of worlds. The Emperor speaks for all dragon kind. His word shapes the fate of species." The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. She had assumed the dragons were a local species, perhaps limited to this one planet. But, if Stone was telling the truth, humanity had just attacked representatives of a massive interstellar civilization. The political and military ramifications were beyond catastrophic. "When will he arrive?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "He is here." The words had barely left Stone's mouth when the chamber began to resonate with a deep, harmonic vibration that seemed to come from the crystal formations themselves. The smaller dragons immediately took flight, arranging themselves in complex patterns around the chamber's perimeter. Even Echo launched itself from Sarah's shoulder to join the aerial display. The vibrations grew stronger, and Sarah watched in amazement as the massive crystal formation at the center of the chamber began to glow with an intensity that made her eyes water. The light pulsed in waves, each wave accompanied by a tone that resonated through her bones. Then, with a sound like celestial music, something began to materialize within the crystal itself. At first, Sarah thought she was seeing some kind of holographic projection. But, as the figure became more solid, she realized she was witnessing a form of technology that made humanity's most advanced systems look primitive. The crystal was somehow serving as a transportation device, allowing instantaneous travel across interstellar distances. The being that emerged from the light was unlike any of the dragons Sarah had encountered so far. While Stone and the others were impressive in their size and majesty, this creature radiated power on an entirely different scale. Standing nearly 5 meters tall, its scales didn't just shift colors, they seemed to contain entire galaxies, swirling with points of light that resembled distant stars. But it wasn't the Emperor's size or appearance that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It was the intelligence in its eyes. Looking into those ancient orbs, Sarah felt as though she was gazing into the accumulated wisdom of millennia. This was a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, who understood the universe on levels that humans couldn't even comprehend. The Emperor surveyed the chamber with a gaze that seemed to catalog every detail. When its eyes finally settled on Sarah, she felt a peculiar sensation, as if her thoughts were being gently examined by a vast and benevolent presence. "So," the Emperor said, its voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber itself seem to sing, "this is the human who showed mercy to our scout." Unlike Stone's halting English, the Emperor's command of human language was flawless. But Sarah quickly realized that it wasn't speaking English at all. The words were forming directly in her mind, translated by some psychic ability that allowed the Emperor to communicate with any intelligent species. "Your Imperial Majesty," Sarah said, attempting a bow despite her trembling legs. She had no idea what the proper protocol was for meeting an alien emperor, but respect seemed like a safe starting point. "Dr. Sarah Chen," the Emperor said, somehow knowing her name without introduction. "Xenobiologist. Dedicated student of life in all its forms. Born on Earth in the city of San Francisco. Daughter of immigrants who fled war in search of a better life for their children." Sarah's mind reeled. The Emperor knew details about her background that weren't in any files accessible from this planet. The scope of the dragon's intelligence network was clearly far beyond anything humans had imagined. "I have come," the Emperor continued, "to hear the testimony of our scout and to decide how dragonkind will respond to humanity's act of aggression." Echo immediately flew to the Emperor's side, landing gracefully on the massive creature's extended claw. What followed was a rapid exchange in the musical dragon language, but Sarah quickly realized that Echo was doing more than just speaking. The small creature's scales were glowing in complex patterns, and the Emperor's eyes were growing brighter as if it was receiving some kind of visual transmission. Sarah watched in fascination as Echo recounted its experiences at the research station. She could see her own actions reflected in the patterns of light the moment she found Echo trapped in the cave, the careful treatment of its injuries, the countless hours spent trying to understand its intelligence and needs. But she also saw her failures, the times her human limitations had led to misunderstandings, the frustration Echo had felt at being unable to communicate its true nature. The Emperor listened to the entire account without interruption, its expression unreadable. When Echo finished, silence filled the chamber for a long moment. Sarah could feel the weight of history hanging in the balance. Whatever the Emperor decided in the next few minutes could determine whether humanity's future held peace or war with one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "For 3 million years," it said, its voice carrying the weight of eons, "dragonkind has explored the galaxy. We have encountered thousands of intelligent species. Some we welcomed as friends. Others we were forced to defend ourselves against. A few we had to eliminate entirely for the safety of all life." Sarah's heart pounded as she absorbed the implications. The dragons weren't just advanced, they were ancient guardians of galactic civilization, with the power to judge which species deserved to survive. "In all that time," the Emperor continued, "we have learned that a species' true nature is revealed not in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those who are helpless before them. The Emperor's gaze fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her feel transparent. When our scout was injured and helpless, you could have dissected it for study. You could have kept it as a specimen for your own glory. You could have handed it over to your military for them to learn its weaknesses. Sarah found her voice. Those thoughts never occurred to me. Echo was hurt and afraid. All I could think about was helping. Yes, the Emperor said, and, for the first time, its expression showed something that might have been approval. You saw a suffering being and chose compassion over opportunity. This is unusual among the younger species. But, the Emperor's tone grew darker, your kind also fired upon our exploration vessel without attempting communication. They chose violence as their first response to the unknown. Sarah felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her. Everything she said in the next few minutes could determine whether her species would be judged worthy of survival. Your Imperial Majesty, she began carefully, humanity is young and afraid. We've been alone in the universe for our entire history. When our military encountered your ship, they reacted from fear, not malice. It doesn't excuse what they did, but I hope you can understand that fear makes people do terrible things. The Emperor's scales shifted through deep purples and blues, the colors Sarah had learned to associate with contemplation. Fear, the Emperor mused. Yes, we remember fear. Every species experiences it in their youth. The question is whether they can grow beyond it. Some of us can, Sarah said with growing confidence. Not all humans are afraid of the unknown. Many of us dream of meeting other intelligent life. We want to learn, to grow, to become part of something larger than ourselves. And how do we distinguish between humans who choose wisdom and those who choose fear? The Emperor asked. It was Echo who answered, flying back to Sarah's shoulder and chirping a series of melodic phrases. The Emperor's expression shifted as it listened to the small creature's response. Interesting, the Emperor said. Our scout suggests a test. It proposes that humanity's worthiness should be judged not by the actions of your military, but by how your species as a whole responds when they learn the truth about what happened here. Sarah's mind raced. What kind of test? You will return to your station, the Emperor explained. You will tell your people what you have discovered, that this world belongs to an ancient and powerful civilization, that humanity's first contact was an act of aggression, and that the future relationship between our species depends on how humans choose to proceed. The challenge was clear. If Sarah revealed the truth about the dragons and humanity reacted with hostility or fear, it would confirm the species' unworthiness. But if humans could respond with wisdom and humility? And if they choose fear? Sarah asked quietly. The Emperor's expression grew solemn. Then, we will ensure that humanity never troubles another peaceful species again. The threat was delivered without malice, but with the finality of natural law. This was how the universe worked. Species that proved themselves destructive were removed before they could cause more harm. I understand, Sarah said. How long do we have? 1 of your months, the Emperor replied. That should give your leaders sufficient time to decide how they truly wish to proceed. As the Emperor began to fade back into the crystal formation, it spoke one final time. Dr. Chen, you have shown us that humanity possesses the capacity for wisdom and compassion. Whether your species chooses to embrace those qualities, that remains to be seen. The light faded, leaving Sarah alone with Stone, Echo, and the injured dragons. But the weight of what had just transpired pressed down on her like a physical force. In 1 month's time, humanity's fate would be decided based on how her own species reacted to learning they were not alone in the universe. Stone, Sarah said quietly, I need to get back to the station. Can you help me transport the injured dragons there? Our medical facilities might be able to help them recover faster. You would do this? Stone asked with surprise. Even knowing the risk? Especially knowing the risk, Sarah replied firmly. If humanity is going to prove worthy of survival, we need to start by making amends for what we've done wrong. As they prepared for the journey back to the research station, Sarah found herself thinking about the impossible task ahead of her. She had to convince humanity's leaders that their first instinct, to react with fear and aggression, was exactly the wrong response. She had to somehow transform a potential interstellar war into the beginning of peaceful coexistence. But, as she looked at Echo perched trustingly on her shoulder, and saw Stone carefully preparing the injured dragons for transport, Sarah felt a spark of hope. If one small act of compassion toward a hurt creature could open the door to communication with an emperor who commanded the fate of civilizations, then, maybe humanity still had a chance to prove itself worthy of the stars. The next month would determine whether humans would join the galactic community as equals, or whether their story would end before it had truly begun. Either way, the peculiar bond between a human scientist and her dragon friend had already changed the course of history. Now it was up to the rest of humanity to decide what the change would ultimately mean.